Disney is not being slowed down at all by this quarantine. They are.
Oh my God. Is this Robin Hood? Are we talking about Robin? Oh my God. See, I told you there was something to talk about. I was so floored by this. Oh my God.
I am both surprised and not surprised at all that they're doing this. So we're talking so for people who haven't been slavishly reading movie development news, Disney has decided that they're going to add Robin Hood to the list of their animated movies that are going to be remade. The issue with the animated Robin Hood that Disney is remaking, though, is that it's an animal Robin Hood. We're not dealing with the classic humans bouncing around Sherwood Forest kind of thing. This is going to be like a fox and a bear playing, Robin Hood, Little John.
My only question is Robin Hood going to wear pants?
Well, the original animated character didn't, but is he going to wear clothes at all?
Yeah, is he going to have genitals?
Well, the Lion King's animals didn't have genitals, so...
So are they going to fix that now to make it anatomically correct?
Well, we know they won't.
That's my burning question.
They'll just do, these are going to be androgynous animals that also wear clothes and, use bows and arrows and live in castles and stuff like that, but they'll look like real life animals. So it's going to be every problem that I had with the Lion King remake by Jon Favreau, but made worse because it's going to be vaguely kind of like the furry community.
Better question. Do you think it's going to bomb?
It won't bomb because it's Disney. Their definition of bomb is weird anyway, because, if a movie makes only twice its budget, which normally would be a success, that's considered a failure for Disney. So,
would you consider Aladdin a failure or a success, though?
I don't think Aladdin made what they hoped. It wasn't a Lion King, for example. Lion King crossed $1 billion, or I think it hit a 1.3 billion or something like that.
Aladdin hit $1 billion too, actually, worldwide.
Okay, yeah, but the goalposts keep moving on that. I feel like Disney is less impressed with $1 billion these days.
Fair enough. Avengers just ruined everything, huh?
I suppose, yeah. They can still do it in CG. They just have to be less realistic.
Right.
If they go too realistic with the CG animation, you're not going to get the kind of emotiveness or the connection to the characters that you got in the original 2D animation.
Right. I agree with you. There's a fine line between being realistic, but you can't be realistic and cute at the same time.
So what was supposed to be a cold open is now an open, a full-on segment.
Just edit it. Just edit it.
But let's start the show. Welcome to episode 72 of the Extra Buttery Podcast, a free-flowing conversation between two guys who love movies and TV. Thanks for coming on back for another quarantine episode. We are still stuck at home, but we are streaming stuff left, right, and center. So this time on the show, we're going to be talking about two Amazon shows. The first one is Undone, from the creators of BOJACK HORSEMAN, and Tales from the Loop, which is an interesting one that just premiered a couple of days ago on Amazon Prime Video. And then after that, we're going to talk about a couple of movies. First, TIGERTAIL, which just hit Netflix a couple of days ago. And then circle back to another Netflix movie from the fall that I finally got around to watching. Jason watched it a little bit before me. DOLEMITE Is My Name. So without any further ado, joining me from Vancouver is my co-host, Jason Chen. So Undone. This is something that I saw the trailer for maybe 3 months ago when it was first being teased as upcoming Amazon original, and immediately it kind of grabbed my attention because it has a couple of things that I really love to see. Surreal visuals. That's something that
rotoscope.
Not rotoscope as well, but yeah, the just surreal images, kind of Salvador Dali kind of stuff, people popping into landscapes where they shouldn't be, and reality pulling apart. I just love looking at stuff like that in general, whether it's art or movies or TV or anything. And then, like you said, the rotoscope animation that they use for this, and rotoscoping is where you shoot a scene in live action, and then in post-production, you go in and you very meticulously paint over the real life images until it takes on a very dreamy kind of painted quality and it's animated, but it has the shapes and the definition of live action. So this show Undone had both of those things, and a few actors in the cast that I really liked. But did you end up watching it because I said I was already watching it and you just wanted to kind of be in the loop, or had you heard of this show before?
Yeah, I felt missed out. Oh. No, I had actually heard of it, but it sort of completely escaped my mind. And then you mentioned it and I was like, oh, well, okay, well, instead of each of us talking about something that we saw independently, maybe it's something that we can discuss together.
I'm seeing my dead father.
I wasn't in an accident. I was killed.
And he's training me to travel in time.
With your ability, we can change what happened.
So I can save him from being murdered.
You're pushing yourself too hard.
What are you doing to me? I can't do this. I can't keep ending up places. No! Seeing stuff and missing things.
It's a relatively short series, so 8 episodes of like half an hour each, so 4 total hours-ish, give or take. And I finished all in one sitting. I agree with you, the visuals are quite striking. So the first thought I had was, whoa, this is a Scanner Darkly. Do you remember that?
Yes, yeah, Richard Linklater.
Yeah, so that's a rotoscope animated film as well, and it didn't really sell particularly well at the time. And I remember watching it, and I think it's like 20 years old now. And I remember it being kind of off-putting. So actually 2006, Scanner Darkly was released. So I remember it being pretty off-putting. So I was kind of skeptical about this kind of animation because sometimes it has a bit of like an uncanny valley sort of feel to it.
It works in a Scanner Darkly though, because the kind of the theme of Scanner Darkly is very much about like people being dissociated from their own identities and stuff like that. So I think like in the right story or the right narrative, that animation style can work really well.
I just like a minor point about Scanner Darkly, but if I remember correctly, like some of the faces had like different shades to it.
Yeah, because the story has something to do with like cops trying to hide their identities with this sort of like invisibility cloak kind of thing.
Right. So their the faces kept changing shape. Like there are certain blots of their face that are like where the skin tone is darker than the other, and it's constantly shifting and changing. And I found that really distracting. I didn't find it that nearly as distracting as in Undone. Although I have to say, like I almost quit after episode 1. Not because of the animation, but because the story felt so cliche to start with.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So the story is about Alma, played by Rose Salazar from Alita Battle Angel. And she is the daughter of a university professor who is believed to have died in a car accident, but comes back to her and tells her that I've been murdered, and also tells her at the same time that she is sort of this shaman, this individual with indigenous blood who can travel through and bend time. And so Jacob, who's played by Bob Odenkirk, asks Alma to travel back in time to figure out who killed him and to prevent the supposed murder. Yeah,
so there's a bit of like a change the past kind of Back to the Future-esque thing.
Yeah, very like... Yeah, so from that, it's very cliched. The first episode, though, we're introduced to Alma, who is, like, at this point, a bit of a self-destructive character. So I kind of like the screw-up in the romantic comedy where, like, nothing in their life is together. But they are this, like, really strong-willed, really intelligent, really sarcastic type character. And she gets in a fight with her parents, some of which I think is her fault, and she gets in this car accident and suffers this brain trauma, and then suddenly, develops this talent. That's when it starts to get good. There's also this subplot about her sister Becca getting married, which I didn't care for at all. I don't know how you felt about that, but it felt tacked on. Like it felt like it just forced Alma to be at certain places at certain times, knowing that she can't be there, to just raise the stakes of her journey.
Yeah, I think the way I read it was that the Becca storyline is supposed to be a constant reminder to the way Alma was feeling in the first episode, where, she was in a decent place in her life. She had a loving boyfriend. She had a stable job, but she felt like she was stuck in a rut, and she felt like every day was the same, and she worried that that was going to be the rest of her life. You know, she's going to spend 40 or 50 years just kind of repeating the same cycle. And meanwhile, her sister is engaged to be married, but is totally happy with kind of being in a very stable routine and doesn't question it at all. So I think the two of them are kind of, the two stories run in parallel, so that Alma is always being kind of, Alma's life is kind of like a foil to Becca's, or the other way around, where it's kind of implied that if Alma decided to give up on her mission, she would just kind of fall back into a life kind of like what Becca's dealing with. Right.
Fair enough. That because in the first few episodes, Alma and Sam have this conversation about what their future would look like, and Alma flatly rejects any sort of future where it involves her settling down and them having kids.
Yeah. And I think that's, that motivation is kind of coming from her father, who was always trying, as a physics professor, she didn't know a whole lot about him before he died, but she knew that he was kind of relentless in his pursuit of knowledge, and he didn't want to kind of live with the status quo, and he felt like there were other answers out there. So there's, I think that's Alma's character kind of picks up on those, that same kind of thirst for more. And maybe she's not able to kind of put it into words, but yeah, like it over the 8 episodes, you do get a couple of kind of different arcs that are kind of like connected together. And there are times where you're kind of cringing a little bit because you can see Alma making a really bad mistake in her personal life, or, endangering the kids at the school that she works at because she's not, she's focusing too much on this kind of shamanistic mission that she's on. And you're wincing a little bit, but I don't know. Ultimately, it did kind of pull itself together. It didn't feel too melodramatic. And I love the visuals. I thought, the using the rotoscoping to kind of make the real life images feel like a dream image and kind of manipulate space and time. It was very effective.
It was very effective. Just not in episode 1 because they had set everything up. I think the big conflict for me that was most interesting was the one in herself, where she's constantly fighting between the fact that she's either a time traveler, a legitimate time traveler, or someone who's just schizophrenic. And it's heavily implied that there is a family history of schizophrenia.
Right.
And my half-assed internet research tells me that one of the co-creators, Kate Purdy, also had a similar battle where she has a history of schizophrenia in her family. And when she was a writer on Cougar Town, which was like this show quite a while ago, she also had like a mental breakdown and had sort of similar episodes. So I think this is partly biographical for her, especially since it's based or set around Texas and Mexico, San Antonio, which I believe is where Kate Purdy went to school. So I agree with you. The rotoscoping, when she's like battling between the schizophrenia and the time traveling in her head, the rotoscoping works. I would just say the first episode doesn't really set you up properly for what's about to happen, because there are certain parts that are very, very trippy.
Yes. Yeah.
And the one thing I wanted to ask you though is the ending. Like, this has been renewed for a season 2, but had this show been just this single season, would you have been happy with the ending? I
think I would, but it's clear that they were pretty confident that they would be able to continue the story, because it's fairly open-ended what ends up happening at the end. Yeah.
It's so open-ended. I was so surprised. And I think part of Alma's character too is that I feel like she forgives a little too easily. So we're going to spoiler territory here, but by the end of the show or the season, she basically forgives her dad. He's like, I see what I did now. I am a different person. I know my past mistakes. But Alma is really quick to believe that. And similarly, she's very quick to forgive her boyfriend, Sam, when she comes out of her coma, and Sam, who she had broken up with before the coma, comes back and still pretends that they're in a relationship. And then afterwards, they have a big fight. And she's like, you know what? Nobody loves me more than you do. Fine, I'll take you back. And I'm just going, what? He he totally disrespected you and lied to you for an entire time. Like, I feel like I've seen this in a rom-com somewhere. And I feel like the female character is always too easy, too willing to forgive.
Yeah, I mean, that's a valid point for sure. I mean, you've definitely seen a lot of female characters kind of sweep their significant others' misdemeanors under the rug if it means keeping the thing together. But there is a brief scene in that sequence where you see how she's using her kind of time travel powers to kind of travel back to Sam's childhood, both like either in India or Pakistan, some like that part of the world. And then when he came over to San Antonio as a kid and was kind of getting bullied for being a different race and that kind of stuff. So I think she got some empathy for him that she didn't previously have. So that might have,
but I feel like that's not a good enough reason to forgive him for that.
No, that's fair. Yeah. Cause just because he was kind of bullied as a kid doesn't give him a free pass to,
exactly
deceive her when she's ill and that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So the last scene is Becca goes on this like basically vision quest where she steals her mother's car.
Or Alma does.
Oh, sorry, Alma, yeah. So she steals her mother's car and then she drives to Mexico to this like place, and she's supposed to, this is where like the two timelines she's created are supposed to realign, and if her mission is successful, Jacob's gonna come back alive and walk out of this cave. The ending shot is of a close-up of her face looking at the cave that is just, and there's this, it's either the sun or the cave is glowing and her face just lights up. Like there's something unexpected that she sees. So right. Do you think Jacob comes back, or is there something else?
I don't know. It's 50-50. I mean, it's either 50% chance.
Well, of course.
What
He
we're seeing is real, and, or 50% chance it's just her kind of illness taking over, and she believes of what she's seeing, but it isn't real in quotation marks. Like, it isn't real in the broader sense of the word. But it's funny too how I ended up watching this. Well, you end up watching it too in all one shot, but right around Easter weekend, because there's some very strong Easter symbols built into this whole season of TV. Like, a lot of the action takes place around Easter itself. You see Alma's mother, who's like a staunch Roman Catholic, going to an Easter vigil service, and she's asked to light the Paschal candle at the church at the vigil service, and then that final scene that you were talking about has some huge call outs to kind of like the Easter Bible story of Jesus rising from the dead and that kind of thing, and coming out of the cave, and there's a lot of very obvious kind of symbols at play there. I don't think they're trying to make it like a specifically Christian allegory. Obviously, they're building in aspects of indigenous religion as well. But it's interesting that it just so happened that it's Easter right now, and we're watching this at the same time. It's kind of like one of those fun kind of like moments where there's definitely like a lot more Christmas stuff that you can watch around Christmas time. Probably a lot less Easter stuff that's less specifically Christian. So it's kind of fun when you get a different holiday kind of syncing up like that.
On a final note, so it didn't lose you after episode 1 where you're like kind of skeptical about how this is going to go, because the whole like time travel through time to solve a mystery or prevent a murder or something like that is just, I feel like it's so overdone. Like, you look at 12 Monkeys, Frequency, which is like a movie 20 years ago, which is basically the same thing. Back to the Future had it. About Time, that romantic comedy. Looper had it. Even Harry Potter had it. So I don't know. What compelled you to continue?
I don't know. I think I connected to the character. I thought that, granted, there's some like kind of recognizable rom-com type cliches in there, but I liked that it was a millennial type character who was living in San Antonio, which isn't a part of the world that you often see in TV shows or movies.
I did like the little touch about how they all hated the Alamo.
Yeah. And then there's the bit about how she's hearing impaired. She needs a implant in her in her head to be able to hear. And again, like that's a detail, kind of like being set in San Antonio or dealing with mental illness. It's something that it's just an extra little detail that they didn't have to include, but they decided to in an effort to kind of like, I don't know, be a bit more inclusive, be a bit try to find new ways to tell stories. So there was just enough of those little tiny kind of touch points that I was like, oh, okay, I don't feel like I'm watching the same old thing.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. But you also watched something else. Actually, time traveler.
Yeah, there's a bit of time travel in this show. So this is another series that's brand new on Amazon Prime Video, and it's called Tales from the Loop. And it, unlike a lot of media that we get, pretty much since the dawn of movies, this is not based so much on a book or a play or anything like that, but it's actually based on paintings. And they're paintings by a Swedish artist, Simon Stålenhag. And he is a kind of a retro-futurist painter, a digital artist. And he's like 35, 36 years old and been working in Sweden for a while. And a lot of his art depicts kind of near future societies or societies that look very much like our own. Okay. But then they have aspects of like high technology that's kind of like rotting away or decomposing as part of the composition. So you'll see like a highway that has some sort of like rusting robot that's kind of like slumped over it. Or you'll see a scene of a farm with like a young girl who's using some sort of like cybernetic thing on her arm to control a robotic piece of farm equipment. Right. And so it's all about the kind of like juxtaposition of everyday stuff with super high technology stuff and how nobody kind of acknowledges how crazy it is that they have access to all of this technology and that it's old and rusted and looks used. So they decided to build a show around this for Amazon, and the series is it's 10 episodes, and I've watched about half of it now. And each episode is a solid like 54, 55 minutes. And it's kind of like an anthology series in that sort of like Black Mirror in the sense that each episode is about a different character, but all the characters live together in the same town, kind of in the Midwest. And they live over top of a underground research facility that was founded by a guy played by Jonathan Pryce, who some people will remember from recently from The Two Popes, but also stuff like Brazil and many, many other things.
What do you do?
When someone says something's impossible, I prove it's possible.
Not everything in life makes sense.
This scientific research facility, kind of like CERN in Switzerland with the particle accelerator, they've been unlocking secrets of the universe, but well beyond our concept of physics, like things to do with, like you said, time travel and, freezing time and switching bodies between two people and things like that, swapping consciousnesses. Each episode kind of follows a different character who lives in this town, and the town has been totally enhanced, but also kind of taken over by this technology. And a lot of it looks like a regular old town, but like, the camera will sweep across a typical suburban house and it'll look like a regular house, but then just sitting out next to it is like what appears to be a nuclear reactor. Or there'll be these big towers with kind of glowing blue things on them just kind of sticking out above the trees. And everyone is so used to it, all the characters don't even acknowledge it. Right. And there's this implication that like the technology was almost like used in some sort of like interstellar battle or something like that, but it's all kind of fallen into disuse, and a lot of it is rusted and kind of just kind of cluttering up the place. And unlike Black Mirror, which presents stories that are very dark and very kind of moralistic in that you see characters interacting with technology and misusing it and then learning a very heavy lesson, this is a lot more kind of quiet and contemplative. It doesn't feel quite as dire. The stakes don't feel quite as intense. So it makes for a very kind of reflective watching experience. It's people have also compared it to Stranger Things in that there's kind of like a secret research facility in a small town,
right?
But there's no horror elements here. Like it's all very it's kind of quiet stories about Americans whose lives have been changed for the better, but also there's still dangers at foot, dangers that they have to be aware of, and they shouldn't like push the technology that they have too far.
Right. Okay. So, like, is there like a villain in this story, or is it like kind of like every man has this like internal conflict within himself kind of story? It's more internal conflict. Yeah. Like the first story is kind of about a young girl who and also the time scale in this is totally weird. Like it's not clear what decade it's supposed to take place in. Like the characters wear clothes that could equally have been like 1950s, 1960s, 70s, 80s, kind of like that range. But all of the kind of clothing and the cars and everything that would help you date it is all kind of mixed together, which also adds to the kind of ambience of the thing. Right. So when they talk about Tales from the Loop is the time loop. Is that what they're referring to? The Loop is the name. It's kind of the casual name for that research facility. I see. Okay. And at the center of this research facility is this otherworldly object, this large sphere that's kind of assumed to be powering everything, but this is a show that has like zero interest in exposition. You're not going to get any characters sit down and kind of like tell you everything you need to know to understand it. You're just supposed to, which I love it about it. But getting back to some of the individual narratives, there's this one story about a girl who kind of finds herself unstuck in time. She ends up meeting a future version of herself. And in an effort to kind of like reconnect with her mother who went missing. There's another story about two teenage boys who go for a walk in the woods and they come upon this rusted out sphere. And one of them gets inside and then they discover that it allows them to switch bodies. And one of them's a jock, one of them's a nerd. So they both get to have a bit of fun for the first few hours, kind of like, the nerd gets to feel what it's like to be muscular and run really fast. And the jock gets to figure out, oh wow, I can do math problems and I can be really smart and I have a way better job prospects all of a sudden than I would have had because I'm not very smart, my regular body. But then it becomes clear that like the jock wants to maybe take over the nerd's life because he actually prefers the job prospects, and it's very Black Mirror-ish. It's a bit, but it's not as scary or as defeatist and like depressing. You don't get the kind of gut punch that you do from right. Black Mirror. So if that's what you're looking for, go back to Black Mirror. I still love Black Mirror for what it does, but this is a much quieter, contemplative kind of experience. You're so dark on the inside, Rob. I'm just trying to think now of and there's this other one, another episode where a girl that we see in that episode about the two teenage boys, right? She's kind of put forward as a possible love interest for the nerd character, but then we get a whole episode about her and how she feels like teenage love, like falling in love with other boys at her school, it's very fleeting. She wants to freeze that moment. So she comes across this, what looks like a thermos in the lake, and it turns out that it has the ability to freeze time for everyone except her. Oh, okay. And she discovers a way to kind of like run around town. She eventually extends this power to a boy that she's interested in. And the two of them kind of go on this, they freeze time for what appears to be months. And they have a great time, living in a fancy house and, taking clothes and food and anything that they want. But then she has to ultimately learn a lesson about it because, you got to have some drama in there. But well, yeah, and you can't bend time and change time without having consequences. Yeah, exactly. Come on, that's one of the tenets of basic time travel. Yeah, but it's those kind of things where it's like a character who's glimpsed very briefly in one episode, then gets an episode of their own later down the line, and that's kind of the way the narrative kind of glues all these people together. So I'm curious to see what the next few episodes I have left on the queue are going to be like. I feel like it. I think again, like Undone, they might be getting a second season out of this. So really curious to see what they do with it. I like sci-fi in general, and I love when you kind of get these
different ways of telling stories with this very visually arresting kind of treatment with this kind of retro-futurist type of flavor.
You would know way better than I do, but do you think there's a bit of a renaissance with sci-fi TV shows? It does seem like a lot of TV shows these days have a bit of a sci-fi bent to it.
Yeah, or maybe I'm just watching too many of them and telling you about them on the show.
That's true, but yeah, other than Star Trek, I can't remember another sci-fi TV show that was... Maybe Serenity, but Serenity was had such a cult following and ended up being canceled as well.
Yeah, true.
But now we've got like Altered Carbon, we've got this.
The Expanse,
even
Love
Westworld. Yeah. Well, Westworld's specialty cable, so that's maybe a different story. But I do feel like because there's so many different services and so many different platforms, it seems like sci-fi all of a sudden has a platform that it never had before. Yeah,
I think you're right about that. I think also the sci-fi of years past was also held back a little bit by production technology. It's kind of ironic, but people would think of like shows from the period you're describing where there's going to be like an alien who looks like Mr. Worf from Next Gen, and there's going to be and there's going to be like kind of shaky CGI, but now CGI has gotten so good that you can have something like Tales from the Loop where these kind of retro future kind of rusted out bits of advanced technology are in the same shots as regular suburban America.
Exactly.
And it all blends perfectly well, and you don't think of it as CGI. You're able to suspend your disbelief.
Right.
And I think that was probably a big part of kind of allowing sci-fi to feel less kind of jokey and Doctor Who-esque and more legit, maybe, for your average viewer.
Yeah, I think so. I think like the popularity of genres kind of ebbs and flows, right? So if you think about it, before The Irishman, we had like gone through a period where there were not a lot of significant or even good gangster films. And then same with sci-fi now, where I feel like it's either ramped up or starting to, and it's actually kind of exciting.
And I would recommend you check out Tales from the Loop. Like I know you're not a huge Black Mirror guy, but
it's too scary.
I feel like but there's a lot of people like you who feel the same way about Black Mirror. Like for some people, like that kind, like I said, like that gut punch of what happens to these poor people in that show. It's too much for people, and it's too much like our own reality that it really spooks you. So the nice thing about this show is that it is very obviously like very different from our day-to-day life, but also similar enough that it doesn't feel like a secret mission in uncharted space kind of thing. Like it's not that far out there, but it's still happening on Earth, but just kind of an enhanced version of Earth.
Speaking of stories about Earth, so I watched TIGERTAIL, which is this new Netflix film that just debuted a few days ago. And it's about an immigrant family. So that's as like a salt of the earth story as you can get. Yeah. There's no aliens, no like technology going on. It's just a film about people. And it's directed by Alan Yang, who was previously a writer on Parks and Rec, which is a great show, by the way. And he is born in California to Taiwanese parents. And I feel like it's important to say this because I think because of who he is, the film turned out a certain way.
You're my father. I don't even know how to talk to you. I never have. 你就是个内心残缺的人。
There are many things I never told you.
So this is a film about Grover, who immigrates from Taiwan to America sometime in the post-World War II period, and it's shown in 3 separate sort of timelines. So one when he's a kid in Taiwan, second when he's a young adult in Taiwan, and then third when he's an old man in America and he's divorced and he's estranged from his 2 kids.
Oh, I like that. Okay, so like it's there's a bit of a Moonlight kind of flavor to it.
A little bit. No gay sex or anything, but
right.
So the film itself, I would say, is fine. I think the plot is really uneven. I think anytime you have to juggle 3 separate timelines, it's very difficult. And I don't think he did a very good job of this. This is a movie, by the way, where I on purpose asked my parents to watch it with me because they were obviously, all of us were born in Taiwan, but it was their period. Like they were kids when Grover was a kid. It was like the same, they occupied the same time period.
Right.
The thing is, like, when you're making a film about immigrants, I think it's very important to get things right. I think it's important to get the historical sequence of events right. I think it's important to get the customs right. And I think it's really important to get the language right. And when the language isn't right, as it is in TIGERTAIL, it really, really grinds my gears. It's kind of like if you had a film about an Irish dude and he ended up having a Scottish accent. If you were Asian and you couldn't tell the difference, it wouldn't be distracting at all. But if you're Irish or Scottish or you had an ear for accents and that happens, it's super distracting. It's like when Tom Cruise was in Far Away and he did that, I think it was his Irish accent, and it was so bad, it just completely killed the film. And for this film, because the cast is all Asian, but not all of them are from Taiwan, the accents in the language really threw me off. So for example, Zima, who plays if you see him, he plays like the Asian dad in every single Hollywood production. It's kind of fucking annoying, actually. He's from Hong Kong. So when he speaks Mandarin, there's a Hong Kong accent to it. Never mind the fact that he can't even speak Taiwanese. But young Grover, Kid Grover, speaks exclusively Taiwanese. And then young adult Grover speaks exclusively Mandarin with a Taiwanese accent. And you get all these things, and then what happens is you don't have a character in 3 different stages, but are obviously clearly the same character as in Moonlight. You have 3 different people in 3 different time periods, and the only thing that connects them is their name.
Right.
And so it bothers me because I'm an immigrant, and I kind of can notice things that are not true, or I wouldn't say true because maybe this is biographical on some level for Alan and his family. I don't even know. But say, for example, there's a scene where Grover has a daughter, and his daughter has had a really poor performance at a piano recital, and he's pissed off. He's kind of berating her in the car, but instead of berating her in Taiwanese, which he spoke as young Grover, he's berating her in Mandarin. And whenever you're angry or you're emotional, if you speak 2 languages, you always kind of default to the language that is your mother tongue.
Right.
So I know when my parents got pissed off at me, they wouldn't berate me in English. They berate me in Taiwanese or Mandarin, whatever language is most comfortable for them. Because you're so emotional, you're so wrapped up, you kind of just default to whatever your, I guess, normal base is.
Right.
And so there are little things like that. And then there is a clear distinction, in my opinion, of people from Taiwan who can speak Taiwanese and people from Taiwan who can't speak Taiwanese, because you occupy 2 very different periods of Taiwanese history. And so if you occupy those 2 different periods, your politics are tinged with that environment you're in. There's a scene where Grover and his wife, who is supposedly from Taiwan, they're in their 1-bedroom small apartment in America that they just immigrated to, and she offers to cook up this dish called mapo tofu. And the moment she said that, my parents and I just kind of looked at each other. We're just like, no Taiwanese person in their right mind would ever cook that dish, because that's not a Taiwanese dish. Maybe that character was like a Taiwanese person from mainland China that came over, and maybe that's why she cooks it. But if Grover spoke Taiwanese when he was a kid, then it's not a dish he would necessarily like either. So there's all these little things that you think about that I don't think people who didn't have that immigrant experience would really know. Alan was born in California, and from what I know, probably grew up in the States and didn't frequent Taiwan or didn't even grow up in Taiwan at all. So I wonder if other people like me who have grown up in both countries feel the same way, or if it's just that apparent to them that there are certain little things that just don't really mix, and it kind of takes you out of the film because now you're questioning everything. You're like, instead of a biographical, heartfelt story, this is clearly just a movie where they cast any person that looks Asian, regardless of how good their Mandarin dialect is, or their Taiwanese even.
Well, that brings two things to mind, actually, because the first thing I wonder about is this a small production that maybe didn't have the budget or the production time to get a proper dialect coach in to work with the actors? Because I've in watching some of I think it's Vanity Fair who posts the videos with the guy, the language expert, the dialect expert.
Guy, yes.
And he's talked about how one of the potential pitfalls that a movie might encounter is if they rush a movie into production with the actors too quickly and they don't have the money and the time to get a coach to work with actors for like weeks on end to practice an accent. And if the actors are just kind of winging it, or they might just default to what is most comfortable for them. And, that's maybe how they got more Mandarin in there, or the less Taiwanese. The other thing that I wonder about is I was reading about how the reception of the movie The Farewell in China, and how, that story played very well in America and English-speaking countries because the custom of like not informing an elderly relative of their illness seems so strange to us. And of course, it is about a Chinese-American woman played by Awkwafina. Apparently, the movie performed very poorly in China because nobody in China thought of that practice as strange.
And that's how they got it right, though.
Yeah.
Right.
So that ended up being a movie that was more of an American movie, even though the majority of the dialogue was in Chinese. It performed a lot better and connected a lot better to non-Chinese people just because of the nature of the plot. So I don't know if like either of those situations are playing into TIGERTAIL at all, whether it was like a preparation thing or it was just like it's a movie made by Americans for Americans.
That's an interesting question. So first of all, I don't know what the budget is, but it doesn't seem like it would be a movie that costs a lot. And even if it did, they do cast some like names that are like really prominent or famous in Asian acting circles. Like the main character Zima is like I said, the Asian Hollywood dad. Right. Joan Chen, she has a minor role, but she comes out in this too, and she was quite popular in the 80s and 90s. And then there's the woman who plays Grover's mom is a really famous Taiwanese actress, and she speaks Taiwanese throughout the whole thing, and it's very clear and very obvious that just not even knowing her, that her Taiwanese is like she is from Taiwan just because the way she speaks. I don't know if it's an excuse, and if you look at the production team, it's still mostly Caucasians, and Alan himself I would consider more American than Taiwanese or any other Asian nationality. I would hate to say they didn't care, but I would think maybe that they don't have the right ear for it. So maybe to you, like Mandarin is Mandarin, but to me there are different accents when it comes to spoken Mandarin, right?
Well, the comparison you made between like an Irish accent, Scottish accent is probably like that's very understandable. Like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The other movie that pops into my head that's kind of in this same situation is the Kevin Spacey vehicle from the early 2000s, The Shipping News.
Right. Yes. Have you read the book? The book is excellent.
I've not read the book, but I remember when that movie came out, and that was one of course, that's set predominantly in Newfoundland, the province in Canada where I'm from.
Yes.
So when that movie came out, there was so much excitement in Newfoundland that there was this big Hollywood movie that, Julianne Moore and Kevin Spacey and Cate Blanchett were all involved in. It was all shooting in this little town. And then the movie came out, and they not only were the accents all over the place, or non-existent, but they were getting certain things about the culture very, very wrong. Like,
yeah, and it pisses you off, right?
Sure. And like Kevin Spacey's character he's supposed to be like working for a newspaper. There's no newspaper servicing a tiny town of 500 people in Newfoundland. They're lucky if they can get the paper from the capital city on a regular basis. And then there's probably the biggest one for a lot of diehard Newfoundlanders was connecting up to what you were saying about that dish that's served in TIGERTAIL. There's a bit in The Shipping News where they serve Kevin Spacey's character seal flipper pie.
Yeah, come on, man.
And it's presented in the movie as having a top and bottom crust and cut into a triangle the way you'd expect like a slice of apple pie to look.
Normal pie,
but
yeah.
Actual seal flipper pie served in Newfoundland is this kind of black tar looking mess of stuff that I don't personally like myself.
Not appetizing.
It's, but it's a traditional dish and it looks like a big lump of tar on the plate. And any like diehard Newfoundlander who watched that movie was immediately offended because they were like and then the question becomes, was it a mistake where they made an artistic choice because they didn't understand the culture, or were they making an artistic choice because they were worried if they presented it the accurate way, people who were not from that culture would be confused? And that's a tricky line to ride as a filmmaker,
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was just about to say my next point is, to answer your second question as well, I do think this film was made for Asian Americans. It is not made for Asian audiences, because Asian audiences would have the same nitpicks as me. The clothing the clothing is right, the setting's right, but the language and the food, two of the most important aspects of any culture, is completely wrong. I do get the sense that if you're gonna make a film for Asian audiences, you need an Asian film crew. If you're going to make an European film for European audiences, you need an European film crew. I think there are very few instances where there's that cross-cultural production and they manage to nail everything right.
Especially when there isn't like a big action-oriented plot that is kind of blowing you past it. Like if it's about people in their natural environment, that's when you can really trip up. Exactly.
So my mom watched The Farewell too, kind of on my suggestion, because I was partly curious what she thought about it. And she's like, yeah, there's same situation. It was a good film. There are lots of situations. But the one thing she said, I remember, she's like, Awkwafina had it down. She actually acts like a kid who was raised in the States. Mm-hmm. Everything from her fish out of water moments when she goes back home to just like her general attitude towards all these like cultural norms, I guess. In TIGERTAIL, when Grover is growing through these 3 different stages in life, there's very little connective tissue, and it really feels like 3 different characters. And I think that kind of ruins it. Not to mention too, like maybe the score independently of the film is pretty good, but in the film it's very misused, because there's this like string sort of solemn music that plays whenever old Grover is on the screen. And it's almost on the spot every single time he appears on that screen, that soundtrack plays. It gets to the point where it's kind of like the bell with the dog, where like when the music comes on and he's on the screen, you're just like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to feel sad at this moment.
Right.
But it's too on the nose, and it becomes too repetitive, and it just loses its effect by the end.
Right.
That's another thing. There are certain shots that in the film, like, they're framed very, very well, and they kind of linger. So there's a sort of like emotional pull it wants you to have, but at the same time, it becomes awkward because you linger for just a little bit too long, and you're not exactly sure why. So for like Terrence Malick, he shoots a lot of mountains and stuff because he really wants you to feel it. And there's actually, moving clouds and stuff. And he's really matched out the music. In this TIGERTAIL, it just misses the spot a little bit. So it becomes a little awkward and repetitive.
Oh, that's too bad. Well, I mean, I might still check it out just to...
you should check it out.
And then maybe like figure out how I react to it versus as somebody who knows nothing about the culture, and, determine whether not having that knowledge means that I can suspend my disbelief a bit more or something.
The first scene is really good because it sets up this like political tension between people from Taiwan and the ruling political party, the KMT at the time. But it never becomes an issue throughout the rest of the film when it's implied that there are certain issues that are connected to it. And that's another thing that I was just like, that subplot should have been been another conflict, and it could have added so much more to this film. It's like a 2.5 out of 4. Like, if it's a relatively short 90 minutes, so it won't take up too much of your time, but it does drag. Let me just warn you right now, it does drag.
Yeah, it just goes to show that like you can have 90 minutes, you can have 3 hours, and they can feel like the opposite depending on how it's used.
Yeah.
That just leaves us with the other movie that we were going to talk about in this episode, and that's something that is a little bit old by this point. I mean, it hit the festival circuit back in September-ish, 2019, and we talked about it a little bit in our TIFF episode because our friend Peter had seen it during TIFF, and now I finally circled back around and watched it. So this is the movie Dolomite Is My Name, which actually it's a similar kind of experience to what I was picking up from TIGERTAIL, because it's set in a world that I don't understand at all.
Blaxploitation?
I mean, like I've seen parodies of blaxploitation.
Right,
I've seen movies like Jackie Brown, which feature like a prominent blaxploitation star like Pam Grier. But I'm not a student of the actual blaxploitation films at all, and I know about them, and I know about you know, if somebody did a parody and used some of the tropes, I would recognize them. But this is a biopic, or maybe a tongue-in-cheek biopic of Rudy Ray Moore, who was a prominent blaxploitation star in the late 70s, early 80s. And he was a guy who was he had kind of fallen through a bunch of different careers. He had tried his hand at being a recording artist. He tried his hand at being a stand-up comic. And, he was kind of coming up empty in a lot of these things. And he finally discovered this character of Dolomite, who's kind of like a pimp character with this habit of getting up on stage and bragging about all of his violent exploits and his success with women. And it's often accompanied with this kind of like jungle beat kind of bongo drum kind of thing that he cooked up. And he got a lot of success with this. He recorded a bunch of comedy albums. He had a small following in the black community in LA, and he took it on tour. And then he decided that he wanted to go aim even higher, and he wanted to make a movie based on the Dolomite character and self-finance it. And no one wanted to give him any money, and he had to scrimp and save to get this thing made, and he finally did. And that's the experience that's documented in this movie.
A man slammed a door in my face. I just found another door. I want the world to know I exist.
You been right. This ain't funny, and it ain't no brothers in it either.
If I get up in that light with my own movie, I could be everywhere all at once. Let's bring Dolomite to the screen.
I remember us talking back during TIFF about how this is like a bit of a comeback story for Eddie Murphy, eh?
Yes. What did you think, though?
I mean, like I said, the actual character of Dolomite felt very odd to me because...
Right, I mean, like his performance in general.
His performance is great. Like
he was robbed, in my opinion.
Yeah, like I could have... obviously, this was a pretty tough year for the Best Actor category.
Right.
And I feel like... unfortunately, Eddie Murphy did himself no favors with a long history of, the Academy. The Academy has a weird memory about this kind of stuff. Like after the what was it, 2006, when he was nominated for Dreamgirls, but then he had made Norbit the same year.
Yeah, and he got roasted, or it cost him because of that.
Yeah, it basically nuked his chances because the two movies came out too close to each other, and people could not understand. People in the Academy could not conscience giving him the award,
right?
Because the Norbit was still so fresh in their minds. And then, he followed that up with a series of other movies, like, one where he played an alien who lives inside of a ship that looks like Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, he kind of stopped caring for a while.
Yeah, and just made a bunch of like really bad sequels and to the Shrek movies. And
this is what Adam Sandler's gonna do because we didn't give him an award for Uncut Gems. Like, seriously, he's gonna get back at us.
He literally said that he was going to do that. I think he said, if I don't get any, I'm going to make the worst movie that what you all think is the worst movie ever made. Just to spite you.
Yeah, and I'm gonna make millions from it. Yeah, so props to him for doing that.
So, but I think that was ultimately what kind of hurt Eddie Murphy this cycle, because now that he's kind of reestablished himself, maybe they'll take him seriously in his next big role. But this movie is stacked with so many other great performers too. Like you got Craig Robinson in there, Keegan-Michael Key, Wesley Snipes.
Wesley Snipes was hilarious. You know what I did really appreciate about this biopic though?
What's that?
Usually when you have a biopic about like the beat up black guy in this white male dominated world, there's a bunch of like resistive forces, usually like casual racism or overt racism, or just people who like seriously doubt him and want to sabotage him. But we don't really get that kind of villain in this film, which I really appreciate. So like all in all, like even though it's making fun of Dolomite at times, you're kind of going on this journey with him and you're rooting for him, and the movie's rooting for him too, which I feel is a very nice change of pace.
Yeah.
I really appreciated that it didn't have the sniveling villain. Like in Ford v Ferrari, you had that Josh Lucas guy, right? Where he's just there just to be sniveling. And you didn't really get that in Dolomite. And I thought that was a really great choice. I think it actually took some balls to do that too, right? Because you don't really have a villain.
No, the villain is more so the dog eat dog.
Exactly. The realities of the business itself. Yes, exactly. There's no like, I'm going to get ya kind of character. So again, much appreciated.
Yeah. And so it's got a bit of a, I think somebody has said this better than I did recently on Twitter, but it's got this kind of like, let's put on a show quality to it that works really well in quarantine, because we're all kind of like holed up on our own, and this is a movie about a bunch of people kind of like getting together and doing something mostly just for the fun of it, and with the kind of like hope that maybe it leads to some box office success, but they're content to just kind of make something for the sake of it and to kind of represent themselves on screen. But I think that about does it for this episode. We've gone through a couple of shows, a couple of movies, but highly recommend Undone and Tales from the Loop. If you burned through whatever show that you've been catching up on recently and you're wondering, have I finally reached the end of Netflix?
The answer is no.
No, there's always something else you can try. And then maybe steer a little bit clear of TIGERTAIL. Depends on how familiar you are with the culture.
I would say if you're looking for a good movie, skip it. If you're looking for a movie about immigrants, skip it. But if you're just genuinely curious about Asian culture and more Taiwan, give it a shot. It's a short 90-minute viewing. So,
and then of course we both liked Dolomite, so
yes.
That's a recommendation from us as well. And you can look forward to maybe a few posts on the website about some of these things in the.
Yes, I will have something up for TIGERTAIL.
But until the next episode, my name is Robert Snow in Toronto,
and my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.